I'm speaking on this bill to give voice to the concerns that have been expressed to me by members of the community of Kanesatake in my riding who would be directly affected by this legislation proposed in a Conservative private member's bill, Bill C-428. The concerns that have been raised in this bill remind us that we need to move forward and truly work in a nation-to-nation paradigm rather than through this paternalistic, piecemeal, and unilateral approach that the government has been using and continues to use in this bill. Bill C-428 seeks to amend the Indian Act by deleting sections dealing with wills and estates, sale of produce, trade with certain people, and the sections on residential school. It also calls on the government to make an annual report to Parliament on its progress on dismantling the Indian Act. Like pretty well all legislation pertaining to the Indian Act put forward by this Conservative government, this bill has major flaws and does not solve the problems it wishes to address. Although it does delete some archaic provision of the bill, other deleted sections like the provisions on wills and estates could put First Nation citizens living on reserve in legal limbo because there is no guarantee that provincial legislation will cover their situations. What's more, there was no consultation with First Nations before presenting this bill, like pretty well all Conservative legislation on this issue. The overriding issue with the relationship that the Conservative government that we have here today has with First Nations is that it's a unilateral, paternalistic one. That is to say, you know, we don't want to wait for you guys to all be in agreement and, you know, we're the government, we know best, so we're going to just go ahead and do this, which is not an approach that is respectful of what unfortunately is not legally but should be the status of First Nations in this country. What we all know is at the basis of the relationship and should always be at the basis of the relationship, that is a nation-to-nation relationship. Bill C-428 was drafted without consultation with First Nations, reinforcing this unhealthy relationship. Unfortunately, it's not surprising, as I've mentioned, and that the Conservatives, like the Liberals before them, act unilaterally rather than engage in meaningful consultation and collaboration. Mr. Speaker, I sincerely feel like I've said this many, many times on many, many bills, and unfortunately, I feel it's once again important that I state it. I want to state that I strongly believe that there is no greater or more urgent challenge facing us as MPs than the need to resolve the degrading relationship that Canada has with our Aboriginal peoples. But there are clear actions that the government can and must and could take immediately by using the UN Declaration on Indigenous Peoples as a guide for what actions must be taken towards the sovereignty and decolonization of Aboriginal peoples. But unfortunately, the number one thing that needs to be done in order to respect UNDRIP is completely ignored by this Conservative government when they fail to do any kind of consultation. At a minimum, you should expect to have a minister responsible for the file introducing a bill like this. The Conservative tactic of using backbenchers to advance policy is a lack of leadership and demonstrates their chronic inability to move forward in the legislative process honestly and in good faith. The very fact that a government private member, rather than the minister responsible, is presenting this bill means that the steps that the bill would have to go through to seek legal relevance, that the House would go through, the amount of debate that it would go through, the access that it has to information from the ministry, all of that is greatly relaxed. And that means that this bill has a lot less oversight over it than it would if it were presented by a minister. So acting in this way, to begin with, let alone the lack of consultation, means that it really aggravates the problems rather than solves them. Now, I believe, alongside my colleagues from the NDP, that we must move away from this paternalism that is in the Indian Act and towards a paradigm where we have a healthy relationship with First Nations and where we are able to maintain their sovereignty and jurisdiction over their lands and businesses. I do believe this. This bill is a perfect example of exactly the opposite because it's in bad faith and it lacks the extensive consultation and the relationship of a nation-to-nation relationship that would be required in order for us to have this healthy relationship that moves away from the Indian Act. In terms of wills and succession, this bill puts First Nations in an area of uncertainty. In any situation not covered by the provincial legislation, and in addition to creating potential conflicts, the burden of this uncertainty would be placed on the shoulders of tribal councils, while Conservatives are continuing to impose budget cuts and there's restrictions on these same councils. And Conservatives don't seem to understand that this is the reality of what it's like in a band. There is not enough money, there is not enough land, and yet these bills that keep coming forward don't take into account that these are the problems. We saw the same problem with MRP legislation, which, you know, it doesn't make any sense because there is no extra money or no land to go along with that kind of legislation. So it's not actually addressing the problem in a meaningful way. The member before me said, you know, it doesn't mean anything if you apologize for the residential schools and you don't actually take action. Well, action requires that money and that respect and that consultation and all the things that go along with actually treating these First Nations as equal partners in the Federation. All that goes along together. You can't just put down bills as a private member and expect that the problem is now going to start actually being addressed. Now, I do have one constituent who really adamantly wanted me to oppose this bill, who came to speak to me. His name is Denis Gaspé. He's from Kanesatake. And some of the things that he wrote to me to say, just so that I would be able to speak his words in this House today, is that consultation with the people has not been undertaken, and any future attempts will be seen as suspect unless an attempt is made to include First Nations groups at the community level who have perennially rejected the notion they are subject to the Indian Act. Now, what he's saying here is that, you know, you cannot change the relationship, as I was saying. You cannot change the relationship that's in the Indian Act without actually doing consultation. So what this bill is purporting to do is just you know, it's flying in the face of actual meaningful change. Now, the major issue that Monsieur Gaspé had with this is Section 7. So the principal objection that he had was to the bill is Section 10. It raised many problems for him, and there just quote, there is no identification of bylaws as separate from band council resolutions. Manipulation of the publication requirement will bring more unrest. So there are a lot of concerns, and I think that there are the fact that there are concerns that there has not been consultation means that, you know, we cannot move forward with this kind of legislation, and you know, we need to you know, set aside the fact that, you know, the process that we're using right now is not actually, you know, an appropriate one. What's in the bill is also not actually going to be doing what it purports to do. So, you know, it's long past the time that we actually address these issues. But we need a process that is actually consultative, that respects UNDRIP, and that is really bringing the relationship, the nation-to-nation relationship between First Nations and Canada into the 21st century. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.